The woman arrived in Caldwell, Texas, on the first cold morning of November, with a child on her hip and a sack so light it could have held air. She did not come on a stagecoach. She walked the last 4 miles down the dirt road from where the driver had told her, politely but firmly, that she had ridden as far as her coin would carry her. The child was 3 years old, a boy named Colt. He had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and he had not spoken a word since they left Missouri 6 weeks ago. The woman's name was Vera Holt. She was 29 years old, and she had buried a husband, a house, a name, and very nearly a future, all in the same summer. She did not cry about it anymore. She had cried herself empty somewhere back in Arkansas, in a barn where a farmer's wife had let her sleep one night in exchange for washing pots. She had sat beside Colt in the straw, and she had cried until there was nothing left to push out, and then she had stood up in the morning and kept walking. That was 6 weeks ago. Now she stood on the main street of Caldwell with cracked boots and a coat that had belonged to a larger woman, and she looked at the town the way a person looks at a door they are not sure will open. The town was not much. A general store, a livery, a 2-room hotel that had a sign in the window reading "No vacancy" in letters someone had painted with a brush that was too wide, a church with a broken bell tower, a saloon that was already making noise at 8 in the morning, a barber, a dry goods dealer, a land office with its curtains pulled. And people. Enough people to notice a woman with a child, and no husband and no wagon, and no clear reason for being there. Vera noticed them noticing her. She shifted Colt to her other hip and walked toward the general store because she needed to know 2 things. First, whether there was work. Second, whether there was somewhere she could put the boy while she found it. The man behind the counter was round and cheerful, and his name was printed on a sign above the door. It said Anders Supplies. His name was Gus Anders, and he was the kind of man who watched everything and forgot nothing and pretended to do neither. He looked at her over a sack of cornmeal he was tying shut. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Vera said. She set Colt down on the floor beside her and kept one hand on his shoulder. "I'm looking for work." Gus Anders tied the last knot on the cornmeal before he answered. "What kind of work?" "Any kind." He looked at the boy, then back at her. "Hotel's not hearing. Saloon's not something I'd recommend to you. Mrs. Pierce, who runs the laundry, lost her girl last spring, but she said she wasn't taking anyone on until the new year." He paused. "You come far." "Missouri." "What brings you to Caldwell?" Vera looked at him steadily. "I needed to stop somewhere." Gus Anders made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, and he picked up his cornmeal and carried it to a shelf. "You could try Harlan Cade," he said with his back to her. Vera waited. "He's a rancher, 6 miles east, runs the biggest spread in this county." Gus paused with the sack in his hands. "He's been looking for a cook and housekeeper since spring. Hasn't found anyone who'd stay." "Why won't anyone stay?" Gus set the sack down on the shelf and turned around. "He's not an easy man," he said, "but he pays what he promises, and he doesn't drink, and he doesn't hit." He said it like those 3 things together made a man almost remarkable. "Whether that's enough for you, I don't know." Vera picked Colt up off the floor. "How do I find the place?" The road east was flat and pale, and the wind came off the plains in long, steady pushes that pressed against her coat and found the gaps at the collar. Colt rode on her back this time, his arms around her neck, his face buried between her shoulder blades. She counted fence posts to keep herself moving. The Cade Ranch appeared at the end of a long drive flanked by cottonwood trees that had dropped most of their leaves. The house was large. Not grand, but large, the way a house gets when it was built by someone who thought they were building something permanent, something meant to outlast them. Stone foundation, wide porch, 2 chimneys, a barn behind it that was better kept than most houses she had seen. The cattle in the east field were healthy. She noticed that before she noticed anything else. She knocked on the door of the house and waited. Nobody answered. She knocked again. A sound from inside, boots on a wood floor, unhurried and heavy. The door opened. The man was tall, not heavy but built in the way that the land builds men who work it daily, thick in the arms and neck, lean everywhere else. He had a face that had spent 40 years in the Texas sun, and it showed. Sharp lines, a jaw that had never learned to sit easy, dark eyes that did not warm when he looked at her but did not dismiss her either. He looked at the woman. He looked at the child on her back. He waited for her to speak. "Gus Anders told me you were looking for a housekeeper," Vera said. "I am," the man said. "I can cook, clean, mend, and manage a household. I've done it my whole life." "What's your name?" "Vera Holt." "The boy yours?" "Yes." "Where's his father?" "Dead." The man in the doorway said nothing for a moment. He looked past her at the Cottonwood Drive, at the road beyond it, checking something she couldn't read. "Harlan Cade," he said. He stepped back from the door. "Come in." The kitchen was cold. That was the first thing she noticed. A big kitchen with good equipment and no fire in the stove, and the smell of a room that had not been properly used in months. A tin plate sat on the table with dried food on it that she did not look at directly. Harlan Cade stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the main room with his arms folded across his chest. "50 cents a week," he said. "Room for you and the boy in the back, meals from the kitchen. You run the house. I don't want to think about the house." Vera put Colt down on the floor and pulled off her coat. She opened the stove, checked the flue, and found a small stack of wood beside the back door. "60, she said. A pause behind her. 55. She laid the wood and struck a match. "Fine," she said. She heard him walk away into the other room, and she began cleaning the kitchen the way you clean a room you intend to live in. The first 2 weeks were simple. Not easy, but simple in the way that hard, clear work is simple. There was too much to do to leave room for anything else. The house had been neglected in the specific way of a house where one person lives alone and tells themselves daily they will get to things they never get to. Dust deep in the corners, a broken window latch in the back room, a pantry stocked with canned goods and nothing else, no grain, no dried beans, no lard, nothing to cook from the ground up. Vera asked Harlan Cade for a list of what he wanted and a wagon to go into town. He gave her both without question. He ate what she cooked and said nothing about it. He did not make conversation. He did not linger at the table. He came in from the land at dusk, washed his hands at the pump outside, sat, ate, and left. She asked him once where he wanted the lamp moved in the front room, because it was throwing shadows across the reading chair at night. He looked at the lamp and the chair for a long time. "I don't read," he said. That was the longest exchange they had in the first 2 weeks. Colt watched him from behind door frames. Harlan Cade did not talk to the boy, but he did not ignore him either. He moved through the house with a careful awareness of where the child was, stepping around him without comment, making space without being asked to. On the 7th day, Vera found a small wooden horse on the floor of the back room where she and Colt slept. It was old and worn smooth, and it had been carved by hand. She did not ask where it came from. She set it on the windowsill and watched Colt pick it up and hold it against his chest for the rest of the evening without speaking. It was Gus Anders who told her. She had taken the wagon into town on a Thursday for flour and salt pork, and Gus was loading her order while his wife, a small, thin woman named Dot who had opinions about everything and shared them like gifts, stood behind the counter and talked. "You're out at the Cade place," Dot said. It was not a question. "I am," Vera said. "How is he?" "He's fine." Dot looked at her the way a person looks when the answer they got was smaller than the question deserved. "He wasn't always like that, you know," Dot said. The way he keeps to himself." She folded her hands on the counter. "He had a wife." Vera stacked tins in the crook of her arm. "He told you that?" "No, it was before we came to Caldwell, but people talk, and people who knew him then talk too." Dot paused, deliberate in the way of a woman who had thought about what she was about to say and decided to say it anyway. "She died in childbirth, 7 years ago now. The baby too." The store went quiet, except for Gus moving crates in the back. "He never courted again," Dot said. "Never looked. And the land is the best land in this county, and there's nobody to leave it to." She picked up her cloth and began wiping the counter she had already wiped. "Some men grieve quietly, and some men grieve by turning themselves to stone, and some men grieve by working until they can't feel anything at all." Vera carried her tins to the wagon. "He paid me through the end of the month already," she said. Dot looked at her. "That's something," Dot said. The morning Harlan Cade came into the kitchen and sat at the table before breakfast, and did not leave was different from every other morning. He usually ate standing at the counter in the 5 minutes between coming inside and going back out. She had stopped setting his place at the table in the second week because he never used it. Now he sat. He had his coffee in front of him, and he turned it around twice with both hands and looked at the surface of it. Vera cut biscuits and did not look at him. "You planning to stay?" he said. "You planning to fire me?" He set the cup down. "That's not what I mean." The biscuits went into the stove. She turned and looked at him. "Then say what you mean," she said. He looked up. "You've been here near a month," he said. "Other women left in less than a week. The one before you lasted 3 days." He paused. "I'm trying to understand why you're still here." "Because I need the work in the room," she said. "Where would I go?" He turned the cup again. "That's the only reason." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "Mr. Cade," she said, "I walked 4 miles into Caldwell with a 3-year-old boy and everything I own in one sack. Whatever reason you're looking for that's bigger than that, I can't give it to you." He looked at her for a moment. "Harlan," he said. "What?" "Not Mr. Cade, Harlan." She folded her hands on the table. "Harlan," she said, "the biscuits will burn if we sit here another 3 minutes." For the first time in a month, something moved in his face. The hard line at the corner of his mouth loosened, held there for a second, and then settled back into place. He picked up his coffee and drank. November became December. The house changed. Not in any way that was visible if you came in from outside, but in the way that a house changes when someone is actually living in it. Warmth in the kitchen at all hours. The smell of food that was cooked, not just heated. A lamp in the front window at night. Colt had not spoken yet, but he had started moving differently through the space. He sat on the kitchen floor with his wooden horse while Vera cooked. He fell asleep on the sitting room rug twice, and both times Vera found him there and did not move him because he had never in her memory slept so peacefully in any indoor space. On a Thursday in the second week of December, she came in from the cold with firewood and found Harlan Cade sitting on the sitting room floor with his back against the settee, and Colt was 3 feet away from him, showing him the wooden horse. Harlan was watching the boy. He was not talking. Colt was not talking, but something was happening between them that did not need words. She set the firewood down and went back to the kitchen. The conversation happened on a Sunday. Vera had spent the morning reading her Bible at the kitchen table, the way she did every Sunday, and Harlan had come in around noon from checking the north fence line, and he had made his own coffee for the first time, and then he had sat down across from her and said nothing for a while. She waited. Outside, Colt was on the porch watching a dog that belonged to one of the ranch hands chase a sparrow in the dirt. "I have a question," Harlan said. She closed the Bible. "The boy," he said, "he hasn't spoken since you came. He hasn't spoken since his father died." A pause. "What did the doctor say?" "I haven't had money for a doctor." He looked at the cup in his hands. "There's a doctor in town. I'll take him Tuesday." She looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." She looked down at the table. The grain of the wood ran in one long direction, and she followed it with her finger without meaning to. "Thank you," she said. He drank his coffee. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why do you run this land alone?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because there's no one to run it with," he said. "You have ranch hands." "That's not what I mean." She knew it wasn't. She did not push further. He finished his coffee and stood up and went outside, and she watched him through the window as he walked toward the barn, and she noticed the way he moved, deliberately and without waste, the way a man moves when he has been alone long enough that the land has shaped him down to his bones. The doctor in Caldwell was a young man named Phipps who had come from Georgia and had a degree from a school that he mentioned twice in the first 5 minutes. He was thorough and careful, and he made Colt sit on the examining table, and he checked him very slowly while Vera stood at the wall and Harlan stood in the doorway. When he was done, Phipps sat back and looked at the boy. "There's nothing physically wrong with him," he said. "Then why won't he talk?" Vera said. Phipps looked at Colt, who was looking at his wooden horse. "Sometimes when a child goes through a loss that's too large for them to carry, they put the carrying somewhere else," he said. "He's not broken, he's protecting himself." He paused. "He'll find his way back when he feels safe enough." Vera looked at Colt. Harlan said nothing from the doorway. On the ride back, the wagon was quiet. At one point, Colt reached over from Vera's lap and put his hand on Harlan's arm where it rested on the wagon seat. Harlan looked down at the boy's hand. He did not move. He drove the last 2 miles back to the ranch without moving his arm at all, and when they stopped at the house and Colt climbed down on his own, Harlan watched him go inside and then sat in the wagon seat for another moment before he climbed down too. He did not say anything about it. But Vera saw his hand, where the boy had touched it, close slowly at his side as he walked toward the barn and then open again, like a man working something out through his fingers that he could not work out any other way. It was Gus Anders again, who told her what she had not thought to ask about. She had come in alone in the second week of December, and Gus was measuring out salt into paper bags, and he said, without looking up, "There was a man through town asking after a woman and a boy." Vera went still. "What kind of man?" "The kind you don't want looking for you," Gus said. He looked up. "Big, red-headed, had a paper with him but he didn't show it to me. Asked if anyone had seen a woman traveling alone with a small child from Missouri." The salt in the air seemed cold suddenly. "Did you tell him anything?" "I told him I saw 100 people come and go and I didn't keep track." Gus folded the paper bag. He rode east. East. The same direction as the Cade Ranch. "When?" she said. 3 days ago." She bought her goods faster than usual and drove back to the ranch with the horses pushed harder than she liked. And she thought about Colt the whole way, about his hand on Harlan's arm, about the wooden horse on the windowsill, about Dr. Phipps saying he'd find his way back when he felt safe enough. She told Harlan that evening. She told him at the kitchen table after Colt was asleep, and she told him the whole thing, not just the man asking in town, but the reason the man was asking. Her husband, Denton Holt, had died owing money to a man in Missouri named Heir Breckett. Not a large amount, but Breckett was not a man who forgot a debt even when the man who owed it was in the ground. He had sent word after the funeral that the debt passed to the widow, and when Vera had written back to say she had nothing, he had written again to say that was not his problem. She had left Missouri before he could make it his solution. She did not tell this part quickly. She told it the way a person tells a thing they have been carrying alone for a long time, in pieces, stopping when a piece was too heavy, starting again. Harlan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. He turned his cup in his hands. "How much?" he said. $80. He nodded once slowly, in the way of a man doing a calculation that was not arithmetic. He stood up. "Go to bed," he said. "Harlan, I'll handle it." She looked at him. "I'm not your problem." He stopped at the doorway and turned back. "You're living in my house and cooking my food, and that man is riding east," he said. "That makes it my business." She held his look. "How do you plan to handle it?" He said, "The way things get handled." And he went to bed. She lay in the back room with Colt pressed warm against her back and the wooden horse on the windowsill, and she listened to the wind come off the plains and press against the house. She turned the facts over the way she turned dough, finding the shape of them. A man she had known for 5 weeks had told her to go to bed like she was covered. She pressed her back against Colt's and closed her hand around nothing and stared at the ceiling until the cold of the room pulled her under into sleep. The man arrived on a Friday. He came up the Cottonwood Drive on a bay horse, and Vera saw him from the kitchen window before anyone else did, and she knew him even at that distance because Gus had said big and red-headed, and this man was both. His name was Cole Birch, and he worked for Ira Breckett, and he had a patient face that made him more unpleasant than an impatient face would have, because patience in a man like that was not kindness. It was certainty. She picked up Colt from the kitchen floor and carried him to the back room. She put him on the bed and she crouched down in front of him, and she held his face in both hands. "Stay here," she said. "Do not come out until I come for you." Colt looked at her with his father's jaw in her own eyes. He nodded. She went back to the kitchen and watched through the window. Harlan was already on the porch when Birch rode up. He came out the front door and stood at the top of the porch steps with his thumbs in his belt and his hat pulled low, and he did not go down to meet the man. He let Birch come to him. Birch dismounted and looped his reins around the porch post and stepped up onto the first step without being invited. He was a tall man, and the step put them level, which Vera understood was deliberate. She moved to the side window where she could hear. "Mr. Cade," Birch said. His voice was smooth, unhurried. "My name is Cole Birch. I represent Ira Breckett of Hannibal, Missouri." Harlan said nothing. Birch reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out. Harlan took it. He read it without expression. He read it a second time. Then he folded it once along its original crease and held it between 2 fingers at his side. "This says the widow Vera Holt owes Ira Breckett $80, Harlan said. "It says Vera Holt. Whether she's still a widow is something I heard different on the road into town." Birch smiled without warmth. "Either way, the debt follows the name." "Who told you she was here?" "I have a gift for asking questions of people who want to be helpful." Harlan looked at him for a long moment. "She's Vera Cade now," Harlan said. "Has been since Wednesday." Birch tilted his head, a small movement, the adjustment of a man recalculating something he had arrived certain of. "A name change doesn't dissolve a debt, Mr. Cade." "I know it doesn't." Harlan reached into his own coat pocket and produced a folded paper of his own. He held it out. Birch took it and opened it. It was a receipt. Vera could not read it from where she stood, but she watched Birch's face as his eyes moved across the lines. The smoothness in his expression went flat. "This is a wire receipt," Birch said. For $80 to Ira Brackett's account in Hannibal, Harlan said. Sent yesterday morning. Birch looked at the paper a moment longer, then looked up. Mr. Brackett will want to verify this. He can verify it from Hannibal. Harlan held his hand out for the receipt and Birch gave it back. You've come a long way for a debt that's been settled, Mr. Birch. I'd hate for you to have done it for nothing. Something shifted in Birch's face. Not anger. The specific tightening of a man who has ridden far and arrived too late and knows the argument is already over. He looked at the front door of the house. I'd like to speak to Mrs. Holt myself. Her name is Cade, Harlan said, and she's not available. Birch stood on the porch step and looked at Harlan Cade with that patient face for a long time, the way a man measures what he is and is not willing to spend to get what he came for. Then he reached into his coat again. He produced a second paper and unfolded it and held it out without a word. Harlan looked at it without taking it. Vera shifted to get a better angle and saw that it was a notice of some kind, with official-looking print at the top. Brackett filed a debt claim with the county in Missouri before she left, Birch said. It's not just about money. It's about the property she took when she went. What property? A horse, a wagon, said she took them from the farm without permission. Harlan was quiet. Vera's hand was flat against the window frame. The horse and wagon had been Denton's, had been hers by any measure of a wife's right, and she had sold both in Arkansas for $6 and a place to sleep 2 nights because $6 was more than she had. She had not thought anyone would follow her for a horse, and wagon she no longer had. Harlan said, "What's Brackett actually after?" Birch refolded the paper. "Mr. Brackett is a thorough man," he said. "He doesn't like loose ends." "Then you tell Mr. Brackett," Harlan said, "that there are no loose ends here. The debt is paid. The woman is my wife. Any property claim against her is a claim against me, and if Brackett wants to bring that claim, he can ride to Caldwell and file it in the courthouse on Mercer Street, and I will see him there with my attorney." He paused. "Tell him also that I know Judge Aldrich personally, have for 12 years. Birch looked at him. "And if Brackett sends someone back here to this property without a legal summons in hand," Harlan said, "I will treat it as trespass. Is that clear enough?" The 2 men stood on the porch in the cold November air, and the cottonwood trees threw thin shadows across the yard behind Birch, and the bay horse stood waiting, and neither man moved for a long moment. Then Birch folded the paper and put it back in his coat. "I'll pass that along," he said. He stepped down off the porch and untied the reins and mounted without another word, and rode back down the Cottonwood Drive. Harlan watched him until he reached the road and turned south. Then he stood on the porch alone for another moment. Vera watched him from the window. He looked at the road a long time after Birch was gone, the way a man looks at a door he has just closed and is making sure it stays shut. Then he came inside. "If you're still riding with Vera and Harlan, do me one favor before we keep going. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. These stories drop every Saturday at 10, and you don't want to miss what comes next." He came into the kitchen and went straight to the stove and poured himself coffee and drank half of it standing up. "He's gone," he said. "I heard," she said. He set the cup down. "There was a second paper," she said, "about the horse and wagon." He turned. "I sold them in Arkansas," she said. "I didn't take them without permission. They were Denton's, and that means they were mine, and I needed the money." He looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "Brackett is going to tell people differently." "He can tell people whatever he wants," Harlan said. "He's not going to file in Aldrich's court with a claim that thin, not against a man who's been in this county 12 years. He picked up his coffee again. "It's done." She stood at the window with her hands by her sides. The Cottonwood Drive was empty. She went to get Colt from the back room. "He's gone," she said, opening the door. Colt was sitting on the bed with the wooden horse in his lap and his eyes on the door. "The man," he said. "The man." He looked at the horse for a moment. Then he got down off the bed and came out to the kitchen, and he went to the table and climbed into his chair and picked up the biscuit she had left for him before all of it started. He ate in the quiet kitchen and Vera watched him and did not speak. After a minute, Colt looked at Harlan, who was still at the stove. "You made him go away," Colt said. Harlan looked at the boy. "I did," he said. Colt considered this. "Good," he said, and went back to his biscuit. She told Harlan that evening. She told him at the kitchen table after Colt was asleep, and she told him the rest of it, the part she had left out before, the part she had not told anyone. She told him about Denton. Not about how he died, which was fast and plain, a fever that took him in 4 days, but about who he was before that, about the loans he took without telling her, from men she did not know, for ventures she did not understand, about the morning after the funeral when a man she had never met came to the door of the farm with a list in his hand, about the second man who came the week after, about learning, in the weeks that followed, that the farm itself was half promised to someone, that Denton had been building a life on the outside of what was real and papering over the gaps with borrowed money and good intentions. She was not saying any of it with heat. She had burned through the heat a long time ago. She said it the way you read a long list aloud, item by item, with full attention and no ceremony. Harlan listened. He turned his cup in his hands. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" he said. She looked at the table. "Because Birch today, with that second paper," she said. "I don't want you to find out later that there's more. I'd rather you know the whole shape of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Is there more?" "I don't know," she said. "I hope not, but I don't know." He nodded, once, in the way of a man who is taking something in and filing it. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "All right," he said again. "We'll deal with whatever comes." She held that word, "we," without letting him see her hold it. She picked up her coffee and drank. He came to the kitchen the next Sunday and sat at the table before breakfast and did not leave. She cut biscuits and waited. "I want to say something," he said, "before I lose the will for it." She did not turn around. "I have a proposal," he said. Something in the way he said it made her set the biscuit cutter down. She turned. He was looking at her in the same way he had looked at Colt's hand on his arm in the wagon, measuring something, or deciding about it. "I'm listening," she said. He set the coffee cup down and folded his hands on the table, and she could see that he had thought about this carefully, that the words had been organized before this moment. "This ranch is the best land in the county," he said, "and it has no one to pass to. I built it to last beyond me, and it won't, the way things stand." She waited. "You need a roof and safety for the boy," he said, "and I need a legal heir, not love, not something either of us has to pretend, a clear exchange." She held the counter behind her. "Marriage," she said. "A contract," he said. "That's what it would be. You stay, you run the house, the boy grows up here on the land. When I die, which will be before you, the ranch goes to him legally. He becomes Cade. You never want for anything." The wind found the window and rattled it. "And in exchange," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You be here," he said, "that's all." She heard Colt in the back room, moving on the bed. She looked at this man at the kitchen table, this man who sat on the floor at 4 in the morning for a child who was not his, who sent a rider to town at dawn to pay a debt before a collector could arrive, who told her the way things get handled, and then went to bed as if the world had been organized, because in his mind it had. "Why, Colt," she said, "you could find a woman with a different child, one that's already speaking, already easy." He looked at the table. "He put his hand on my arm," he said. She looked at him. He did not look up from the table. "He's never done that with anyone," she said. "Not since his father." Harlan said nothing. She let out a long breath. "I want it written down," she said. "Every word of what you just said, on paper, witnessed so it can't be taken back. I'll have it drawn up in town Monday." She looked at him for a long time. "All right," she said. He looked up. "All right," she said again. He nodded once. He picked up his coffee and went out to the land. They were married by a judge in Caldwell on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of December. Dot Anders was the witness. She cried. Gus told her to stop and then cried himself and pretended it was dust. Colt wore the only clean shirt he owned and held his wooden horse in both hands. Vera wore a blue dress that had been let out at the waist by a woman on the Missouri road and not properly mended, but she had pressed it flat the night before, and it was the best she had. Harlan wore a dark coat that fit him like it had been made for him, which it had, some years ago, which meant it still fit. The judge read the words. They said the words. Harlan put a ring on her finger that had belonged to his mother, a plain gold band with a small nick in it, and he held her hand for exactly as long as the ceremony required, and then he let it go. They drove back to the ranch in the wagon. Dot had made a cake and left it on the kitchen table with a note that said simply, "Good luck to you both." Colt ate 2 slices and fell asleep on the sitting room rug. Vera sat at the kitchen table. Harlan sat across from her. They drank coffee in the quiet house. "The back room is yours and the boys'," he said. "I'll stay in the main room." "That's fine," she said. He nodded. He looked at the ring on her hand, just for a moment before he looked away. Then he finished his coffee and said good night and went to bed. She sat at the table a while longer. She turned the ring around her finger once, thinking about his mother, who had worn this band her whole life and never known it would end up here, on this hand, at this table, for reasons the woman could not have predicted. She got up and washed the cups and put out the lamp. January came hard. The plains in January have a silence deeper than autumn, a silence that presses against a house from all sides and makes everything inside feel very small and very necessary at the same time. But the house was warm. Vera cooked. She mended. She kept the fires. She managed the household account with the money Harlan gave her without question or review, and she found that she was good at it, that the rancher's household was something she could organize the way she had always organized things in her head, precisely and without waste. Harlan worked. He came in at dusk and ate and sometimes sat in the front room while she read, and they talked about the ranch, about the cattle, about the winter fence repairs, about the price of grain in Caldwell, and those conversations were not long, but they were not nothing either. They were 2 people learning the shape of a shared space. Colt watched all of it. He was everywhere in the house now, moving freely, with the wooden horse always somewhere nearby. He had started pulling at Harlan's sleeve to show him things outside, a coyote track in the frost, a bird he had not seen before, the place in the south pasture where the ice had frozen the grass into flat white plates. Harlan always went and looked at whatever the boy was showing him. He never talked down to him. He talked to Colt the way he would talk to a ranch hand, directly and without fuss, as if the boy's silence were simply a communication style he had no quarrel with. There were evenings when Harlan came in and sat in the front room chair and Colt came and sat at his feet on the rug, not close enough to touch, just close enough to be in the same radius, and the 2 of them would sit like that in the firelight with Vera at the table and nobody spoke, and the room was not quiet in the way it had been quiet before, when it was the quiet of an empty house. It was the other kind. On the 5th day of January, Colt spoke. He had been sitting at the kitchen table while Vera made bread, and Harlan had come in from outside and taken off his coat and sat in the chair across from the boy to pull off his boots, and Colt had looked at him very seriously and said, "Your horse has a loose shoe." Harlan looked up. Vera's hands went still in the dough. "Which one?" he said. "The gray one," Colt said. "I heard it when you rode in." Harlan put his boot back on. He stood up and went back out to the barn. Vera pressed her hands into the dough and kept pressing and did not look at her son because she could not look at him right then. She kept her face toward the bowl and her hands working, and she breathed through the bread. Colt watched the door Harlan had gone through. "He'll fix it," Colt said, to no one in particular. "He will," Vera said. "There are things that happen slowly and things that happen quickly, and the trouble with human feelings is that they do not announce themselves. They simply accumulate, without ceremony, in the space between one ordinary day and the next, until one morning a person wakes up, and the accumulation is so heavy it has a weight that can be felt." February was that month. Vera woke one morning in the back room with Colt's warm back against hers, and she lay in the cold early light, and she understood, clearly and without drama, that she had agreed to one thing and found herself inside a different thing entirely. She had agreed to a contract. She had agreed to be useful and present, to give this man a legal heir and a warm house, and a life that had the shape of a family without requiring it to be one. She pressed her thumb into the ring on her finger until the small nick in the gold caught against her skin. She had not agreed to wait for his footsteps in the evening. She got up and made the fire and stood at the window with both hands around a hot cup and looked at the east pasture turning gray and pale in the early light. The cattle moved in it. One of the ranch hands crossed toward the barn. Far out on the fence line, a figure moved along the posts with a long, familiar stride. She watched it until it was too small to see. Then she went back to cooking. There were things Vera did not know about Harlan Cade that February taught her slowly. She did not know that he had built the chair in the front room himself in the second year after his wife died, because there had been a chair there before, and he had burned it one night without any plan to replace it, and then realized that a man still needs somewhere to sit. She did not know that he had a book of maps in the bottom drawer of the desk in the main room, pages of hand-drawn territory and trail routes, some marked in pencil and some in ink, from a time before the ranch when he had ridden territory as a young man. She found it on a Tuesday when she was cleaning the desk, and she opened it and sat on the floor for 10 minutes going through it. All these routes through country she had never seen, marked in his hand before she existed to him at all. She did not know that he got up at 4 o'clock every morning, an hour before she did, and sat in the kitchen in the dark with his coffee, not because he needed to, but because it was the 1 hour he kept purely for himself. She found out about the 4 o'clock because Colt woke with a fever in the second week of February, and she came to the kitchen for the medicine tin and found Harlan already there. He looked at the boy in her arms. He got up without a word and added wood to the stove and pulled the chair close to it, and she sat with Colt wrapped in the blanket she had grabbed. And Harlan made a poultice from dried sage the way his mother had taught him, the way people in that country had been making poultices for 100 years, and he put it on Colt's chest and sat on the floor beside the chair with his back against it while the boy slept. They sat like that in the warm kitchen in the 4 o'clock dark for 2 hours. Neither of them spoke. At some point Vera's head tipped back against the chair and she slept too, a light, strange sleep full of images she would not remember, and when she woke the fire was higher and Colt's fever was lower and Harlan was still on the floor beside the chair. She looked at him. He was awake. He was looking at the fire. "Thank you," she said. He said, "Drink your coffee. It's getting cold." She looked at the cup on the table beside the chair, which he had set there while she slept. She wrapped both hands around it and drank. The days after the fever were quieter than usual. Colt recovered fast, the way small children recover, completely and without drama, and by Thursday he was running in the yard again with full noise and no memory of having been ill, and Vera watched him from the porch and felt the tightness in her shoulders release for the first time in a week. Harlan came out of the barn at midday and stood beside her on the porch for a moment, watching Colt chase the dog across the yard. He said nothing. She said nothing. They stood there together while Colt fell twice in the dirt and got up both times laughing, a high clear sound that carried across the yard, and Harlan watched it with the stillness of a man who is filling something up that has been empty a very long time. "He's going to be trouble," Vera said. "He already is," Harlan said. She looked at him. The corner of his mouth had done the thing again, that brief loosening, and this time it did not settle back as fast. It was Colt who broke the thing open. He was practical, the way small children are practical. He had no patience for things that were not named. He lived in the world as it was, or as it seemed to him to be, and on a Saturday afternoon in the last week of February he said to Harlan, directly and without preamble, "Are you my father now?" They were in the barn. Harlan was showing Colt how to check a horse's hooves for stones, and Colt was paying close attention the way he paid attention to everything Harlan did. Vera was at the barn door with a water bucket, and she heard it, and she went very still. Harlan set the horse's hoof down. He crouched in the straw and looked at the boy at eye level. He was quiet for a long time. "What made you ask that?" he said. "Because I don't have one," Colt said. "I had one, but he's gone, and you do everything the other fathers do." Harlan looked at the straw between his boots. "What do the other fathers do?" he said. "They fix things," Colt said, "and they come inside at night, and they know where I am." Vera's hand tightened on the bucket handle. Harlan looked at the boy. "I'd be honored to be your father," he said, "if that's what you want." "It is," Colt said, as if this had already been decided and they were just catching up to it. He went back to looking at the horse's hoof. Harlan stayed crouched for another moment. He looked toward the barn door. Vera was already looking away. At the yard, at nothing. At the fence lined far out where the grass had started to come back green at the roots. She heard him stand up. She walked back to the house. He came to the kitchen after supper. Colt was already in bed. Vera was at the table with her Bible and her coffee, and she heard his boots on the floor and did not look up. He sat down. He turned his cup in his hands. "I want to change the agreement," he said. She looked up. He was looking at the table. "The contract we made," he said. "It was fair for what I knew then. I don't think it's the right contract anymore." Her hands were flat on the Bible. "What do you want to change?" she said. He looked up. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as a housekeeper, not as someone I pay." He stopped. He looked like a man who has practiced what he is about to say and found in the moment that the practice was no use at all. "I want you to stay because I want you here. That's the only reason I want to say out loud." The kitchen was very quiet. "Harlan," she said. "I'm not going to put a word on it that you're not ready for," he said. "I know what I told you in December. I know it was a cold thing to propose. I'm not asking you to forget it." He paused. "I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be something different than what I offered you then." She looked at him. Outside, the wind moved across the plains in the long, steady push of a February night, and inside the fire was high and warm, and the house smelled of bread and sage and coffee, and her son was asleep in the back room with his wooden horse in his hands. "You already are," she said. He looked at her. "You already are something different," she said. "You have been for a long time. I just didn't know if you knew it." He was very still. "I'm not easy," he said. "I know. I don't have a soft way of doing things. I know. I haven't got the words most of the time." She looked at him with a steadiness that had been building in her since November. since a woman on a road had needed somewhere to stop, and had found it, not in the town and not in the job, but here at this table in this kitchen with this man who sat on the floor at 4 in the morning and made coffee and put it where she could reach it. "You sat on the kitchen floor with a sick child," she said, "and you made coffee and put it where I could reach it when I woke up. Harlan," she paused, "you have every word I need." He looked at her for a long time. He reached across the table. His hand rested on the table beside hers, not on top of it, just beside it. She turned her hand over. His closed around it. They sat like that at the kitchen table with the fire going and the wind outside and the lamp between them, and neither of them spoke, because neither of them needed to. In March, a letter arrived. It came from a lawyer in St. Louis, addressed to Vera Cade, which was a name she was still learning to answer to, and it was from the estate of a woman named Eugenia Marsh. Vera did not know who Eugenia Marsh was. She opened the letter and read it twice. Eugenia Marsh had been a schoolteacher in Missouri, in the town nearest the farm where Vera grew up, and she had died in January at the age of 81 with no living family. Vera had been her student for 3 years, from age 7 to age 10. She had forgotten her entirely. The letter said that Eugenia Marsh had left a small bequest to every child she had ever taught, not large amounts. The amounts depended on the year and the child. Vera's amount was $120. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she read it. She thought about a woman she had not thought of in 20 years, a woman who had taught her to read properly and to write in a clean hand and to do sums in her head, a woman she had left behind at 10 years old when her family moved and had never once looked back at. A woman who had written down the name Vera Hollis, which was her name then, her maiden name, and had tracked her through Vera Holt to Vera Cade without being asked to, without knowing she was doing it, simply by keeping a list of her children the way a teacher does, year after year, long after the children themselves have stopped keeping count of her. She folded the letter. She went and found Harlan in the barn. She handed him the letter. He read it. He handed it back. $80, she said. He looked at her. You paid $80 for me in December, she said, that I told you I would pay back. This is 120. She held it out. 80 is yours. He looked at the letter in her hand. Vera, he said. It matters to me, she said. Take it. He took the letter. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket. All right, he said. All right, she said. She turned to go back to the house. Vera, he said. She stopped. She turned. He crossed the barn in 4 steps and he kissed her once, directly, without preamble, the way he did everything, and she kissed him back in the same spirit. And then they stood in the barn with their foreheads together and the horses quiet around them. I forgot to say it, he said. She waited. I love you, he said. I've known it since the fever, maybe before. She pulled back just enough to look at him. I know, she said. He pulled back slightly. You knew. A woman knows, she said. You sat on the floor for 2 hours. He looked at her. That's all it took. That's everything, she said. That's every bit of it. He made a sound that was nearly a laugh, a real one, full and unguarded, and she had not heard that sound before, and she understood in the hearing of it that she was going to spend the rest of her life collecting the moments that produced it. In April, the cottonwood trees along the drive came back into leaf. Colt rode a horse for the first time with Harlan's hands under him, solid and sure, and the boy laughed out loud, and the sound of it carried across the pasture, and Vera heard it from the porch and closed her eyes. In May, Gus Anders told them in the general store that Cole Birch had been found in a creek bed outside of Abilene with nothing on him but his boots, and that Ira Breckett had closed his operation in Missouri and moved somewhere nobody could say. Vera bought her flour and salt pork and drove home. In June, Colt asked Harlan to teach him to rope. In July, Vera found out she was carrying a child. She sat in the back room in the early morning with her hands in her lap, and she held this knowledge the way you hold something fragile, with both hands flat and open underneath it. She thought about what Harlan had told her on that December day at the kitchen table, quiet and careful, and breaking something open in himself to say it. I need a legal heir. I need a child as heir. She thought about Colt, who was already his, already named Cade in the papers, already running the south fence line beside him on Saturday mornings asking questions about everything he saw. She went to find him. He was mending fence in the east pasture, and he looked up when he heard her coming, and she walked to where he stood and she said, without ceremony, "I have something to tell you." He waited. She told him. He set the fencing tool down slowly. He looked at her. She watched his face, because she had learned by now to read it, learned the small movements and the still moments, and what she saw was not calculation, not the rancher measuring what this meant for the land and the name. His jaw went loose, in a way she had never seen it. He put his hand against her face. "Are you well?" he said. "I'm well. Are you afraid?" She looked at him. "No," she said, "I'm not afraid." He pulled her to him in the east pasture in the July heat, with the cattle watching, and the fence post he had been mending standing half done beside them, and he held her with both arms the way he held everything he decided to keep, which was completely, and without condition. August came in with long, flat light that turned the grass gold from the roots up, and the mornings were still cool enough that the kitchen fire felt right, and Colt started getting up early before 7, before he was required to, and coming to the kitchen and sitting at the table while Vera cooked the way he had always done, except that now he talked. He talked about the horses and the fence line, and a hawk he had watched catch a prairie dog in the south field, and what Harlan had told him about rope maintenance, and how many head he planned to have by the time he was 10. Vera listened and cooked and answered when he asked her things, and let the sound of it fill the kitchen, the way she had once thought this kitchen would never be filled. One morning in August, Colt came in and climbed into his chair, and put his wooden horse on the table in front of him, and looked at it for a moment. "Mama," he said. "Colt, are you happy?" She kept her hands in the dough. "Yes," she said. "Because of the ranch." She pressed the dough down and thought about it honestly, the way the boy deserved. "No," she said. "Because of the baby." "That too," she said, "but not because of the ranch and not just because of the baby." Colt looked at the wooden horse. "Is it because of him?" he said. She looked at her son, who had not spoken for 6 months after his father died, who had put his hand on a stranger's arm in a wagon, because some things in children bypass the part of the brain that has learned to be careful. "Some of it," she said, "but it's also because of you, and it's also because I stopped being afraid a long time ago and I didn't notice until I looked back." Colt picked up the wooden horse and turned it in his hands. "I stopped being afraid too," he said. "I know," she said. He set it down and looked at her. "When did you stop?" he said. She pushed the dough down and considered the road from Missouri, the Arkansas barn, the 4 miles of dirt into Caldwell, the door she had stood in front of not knowing if it would open. "When I knocked," she said. He looked at her. "When I knocked on that door and it opened," she said. "That was when." Colt thought about this. He picked up his wooden horse and climbed down from the chair. "I'm going to see if he needs help with the gray," he said. He went out the back door into the morning. She watched him cross the yard toward the barn, this boy with his father's jaw in her eyes, this boy named Cade now, who could hear a horse's loose shoe at distance, and had decided on his own that a quiet man who showed up was a father, because the definition was that simple to him. She pressed her hands into the bread. The fire in the stove was steady and even. Outside the window, the east pasture was green going gold in the August light, and the cattle were fat, and the cottonwood trees along the drive threw long shadows across the road, and somewhere across the yard, a door opened, and a boy's voice said something, and a man's voice answered it, low and plain, the way water sounds when it moves over clean stone. She listened to it. Then she went back to making bread. They called the baby Ruth. She was born in February, on a morning that came in clear and cold, the hard blue sky of a Texas February with no clouds in it, and the light so sharp it threw everything into edges. Dr. Phipps delivered her in the back room. He had come out the night before when the time looked close, and he had slept in the front room chair and woken when Vera called and done what needed doing with the steadiness of a man who had been to Georgia and back and knew what he was for. Colt stood in the hallway and did not speak. He had been there since 2 in the morning, when the house had woken up and gotten busy and nobody had told him to go back to bed, probably because nobody remembered he was standing there. He stood in the doorway of the hall with the wooden horse in both hands, and he did not come in and he did not go away. When Phipps came out to wash his hands, he looked at Colt in the hallway and said, "You have a sister." Colt looked past him at the door. Phipps dried his hands and went to get his bag. Harlan was in the doorway of the back room. He had been there since Vera told him to stay, and then told him to come back, twice, in the way of a woman who wants company and also needs the room, and he had understood both instructions and carried out both without complaint. Vera held the baby. Ruth was red and small, and her eyes were shut, and her hands were fists, and she was making a sound that was not quite a cry and not quite anything else. A sound like a person who has arrived somewhere and is taking stock. Harlan looked at her. He looked at Vera. Vera looked back at him across the baby. Harlan stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and Vera shifted Ruth toward him, and he took her with both hands, carefully, the way he had handled every fragile thing she had ever seen him near, the foal with the bad leg, the fence post that had come loose in the hard freeze, the cup of coffee set beside a sleeping woman, all of it the same careful attention. He held the baby and looked down at her. His face was unguarded in the way it only went when he thought no one was watching, and Vera was watching, and she did not look away. Colt appeared in the doorway. He still had the wooden horse. He looked at the baby in Harlan's arms for a long time. "She's small," he said. "She is," Harlan said. "Was I that small?" "Smaller," Vera said. Colt came into the room and stood beside the bed and looked at Ruth's fists. "She's mad about something," he said. "She just got here," Harlan said. "Give her a minute." Colt considered this. Then he set the wooden horse on the blanket beside the baby, carefully, in a place where she could see it if she opened her eyes. He stepped back. Nobody said anything. The room was cold at the edges and warm at the center, and the light came in through the east window at a low angle and lay across the bed in a long flat stripe, and outside the cottonwood trees were bare against the blue sky, and the house was quiet in the way it had been quiet all those months before, except that it was not the same quiet at all. Ruth opened her eyes. She looked at the wooden horse. She looked at the ceiling. She closed her eyes again. Harlan made a sound low in his chest, quiet and involuntary, the sound a person makes when something lands in them that they were not braced for. Vera heard it. She reached over and put her hand on his arm, and he sat on the edge of the bed with the baby, and she kept her hand where it was, and outside the morning went on being blue and cold and particular, and nobody moved for a while. If this story stayed with you, drop a 1 in the comments. 1 number, that's all. I read every single one. This story was written for Wild West Tales. All characters and events are original fiction, a assisted production.